So the only thing we've done so far is that in our project section, just to reiterate for the video, we dropped our animationing 1.0 file, our Illustrator file, into that space. We then chose to convert it into a composition rather than footage, and then we chose layer size from the next option and clicked OK. We then took that animationing 1.0 and dropped it into our timeline. We then went up to the composition settings and just changed this 3 to a 1 under duration. If you just want to familiarize yourself with this screen, let me show you a couple tips and tricks. So if you feel like your computer is kind of laggy a little bit when we're working on some of these things, do you guys see this right here in the middle of my screen? This is kind of my view window port. It says full right now, and there's kind of like an RGB, red, green, and blue little icon here. This is actually your settings so that you can turn down the quality of the video temporarily so that you can kind of do the animation, and then that way it's not lagging your computer with the full quality of the video. So if you're working on a really big animation, this is very, very helpful space. If you can tell when I zoom in here, it's going to be kind of pixelated in the screen. Z is the zoom key if you wanted to select the zoom key to zoom in. You can hold on the Option key or Alt key to change it to a minus to zoom out. That's pretty standard with kind of Illustrator, Photoshop. But this space right here is very, very useful to be able to turn down the quality. So if I have it set to full, you should see like the illustration is very nice and crisp, like an Illustrator file. But when you turn this down to like third or half or quarter, it's going to lose some quality. But the advantage there is that you can then use your computer to kind of work a little bit faster potentially. So that's a useful thing. If you want to try turning that down, if you need to at any time, that will be very helpful. I'll try to keep mine on full as much as I can. A quick tip real quick is that if you click the tilde button, which is the button on your keyboard that's right next to the number 1 and above the tab key, you can actually zoom in and see a full window of whatever window that you're opening. So if you can tell, the bottom of my screen here is what's called the timeline. We'll talk about the timeline in detail here in just a second. If you hit tilde while your cursor is over top of the video, you can zoom into the video so that's, takes up your full screen. So if you wanted to just like preview your video in like kind of a more full screen mode, you can do that very easily by kind of like zooming in so that you can see it very large. I'm holding on the space bar now to get this little hand icon to pop up so I can kind of drag myself around this digital space. So try that, try the tilde button. It allows you to kind of zoom in and zoom out. You can also do it over top of your timeline as well. Now, how we're actually going to do our animation and get into our footage. This is what gives us what's called a pre-composition or a pre-comp. And you can tell it's a pre-comp because it has this film icon. It actually is treating the whole illustration all as one layer. So it's just like layers as you would have them in Illustrator or Photoshop. You can get into the footage if you double click on this icon or the name. So I'm going to double click and it will change my screen. So just go ahead and watch along with me just for a second. If I double click this, it will jump into where you can actually see the layers, and each of the layers should be divided into illustrations so that you have sort of like illustrations on different layers here. So I'm going to close that real quick. There's a little tab that pops up right here at the top of the screen. I'll do that one more time if you want to follow along with me. So you can see in my timeline, I've got the footage itself, just like you had it just a moment ago if you haven't double clicked on it yet. You can double click on where it says source name. Underneath that, there's an icon that looks like footage. You can double click on the name or the footage icon itself, double click. When you double click, it should open up another tab in your timeline where you're inside of the composition, and you should be able to see the layers that you populated from Illustrator. We'll go back to Illustrator and talk about this a little bit later, but what we're going to do is actually all of our animation on the layers themselves. You should see that there's several layers here, and there's actually more layers than we need. And I'm going to show you how to hide some of them because we actually are not going to animate some of these that say demo on them. Those are part of another lesson that we'll get into maybe towards the end of class today. So we're going to animate some of these. So if you've double clicked and you are looking at your like sort of Illustrator layers that have been split up here, and we're going to animate these, that's great. If you hover over them, you should see that it kind of pops up with what is on that layer in your viewfinder port. So where you're actually looking at the illustration itself. While you're hovering over these layers, it'll kind of show you where that layer is, which is awesome. Now, does anyone else see something different here in the timeline where mine says mode and TRK MAT, that's track mat, and then parent and link? Does anyone have some icons there instead? Let me know what you're looking at. You can actually switch these back and forth if there's a little button at the right beneath that at the very bottom of the screen where it says toggle switches and modes. If you find that button, you can click that to switch back and forth between one that will give you some icons and one that'll say like normal, none, and none, versus kind of just some little icons and buttons. What I want to see is the icons. So if you see one that just looks like, if I could zoom in here, which I don't think I can on Zoom, which is kind of ironic, I guess, since it's named Zoom. But if you look here, there's a character that looks like kind of a dude looking over a wall, I think is what it's supposed to be. And this guy is called the shy guy. That's what they call him, the shy guy. So what you can actually do is hide some of these layers, which is super, super useful, because a lot of times when you get into big projects and you want to animate a lot of things, you're going to have a lot of layers to animate. And what's really useful with this is that you can hide some of these layers so you're not being distracted by the ones that you're not working with temporarily. So what I'm going to do, if you guys can watch my screen real quick, I'm going to click this little button right next to where it says SNS demo, SNS demo 4, 3, 2, and simplify and slice demo. So those first 4 top layers, we're going to hide them together. Now you can still see them, and that's okay. Please leave the little guy up, this little shy guy, keep him activated for mask shape for the TV, logo, and TV. And then you can click that little down arrow. So it looks like he kind of like hides behind the wall. Okay, and then the next thing, if you want to check my screen real quick, I'm going to click this button right here. I'm hovering over it. It's just, this is the shy switch. Hide all layers for which the shy switch is set. When I click that, it'll make those layers disappear. And you can get those back up anytime by clicking that shy switch button again. Okay, go ahead and also, if you can see, one of these layers is invisible and we want to turn it on. This is the mask shape for the TV. If you go all the way over to the left-hand side, there's a little eye icon, just like you would hide or reveal things in Photoshop or Illustrator. You can click that to turn it on. And what you should see happens when you turn it on is that the logo should disappear. What I have there is just a duplicated shape of the size of the TV screen so that we can hide the logo and reveal it later on. So we'll use this as sort of a mask shape for the TV. The next one I want to talk about is this section here that says parent and link. You guys see the section that says parent and link? So parent and link is actually an opportunity for you to be able to move things all together when you want them to, share the same movement within the space. And this is a really useful tool as well, especially to save yourself time. Let's say I wanted to kind of create a scene, right, where the TV starts over on like the right-hand side and then zooms in. That's kind of the animation. If you guys remember, we're going to add like a little wiggle to it. But we want to make sure that everything goes along with the TV. We'll do most of our animation for that movement just on the TV layer itself. We want to make sure that the logo and the mask shape for the TV come along with it. So when we're doing that, we want to do that as well. Oops, double clicked on that. Oops, and just to show you what happens if you double click on these layers, they will open up a new viewport finder at the top of your window. There's tabs up there. They're kind of, difficult or easy to miss really. So if you just see those and you didn't accidentally mean to kind of double click and just focus on one layer at a time, you can click this little X to turn that off and go back to your composition. So just if that happens, it's okay. You can just close those tabs. All right, so when I select the parent section, I'm going to go ahead and choose the layer that I want them to follow. You can do this 2 different ways. You can do it from the list, which is easy enough because there's not, like 100 layers or anything. So I could just go down and choose 7 TV, and that will make that mask shape layer follow the TV layer whenever we do any animation. Another way you can do this is if you use this, what's this called is the pick whip. So if you just kind of like click and drag to drag out this little pick whip, you can then select the TV layer and it will also choose that from the list. So again, 2 different ways that you can add a link and choose a parent. So the TV is going to be the parent. And these, what we call children layers, will just go ahead and follow the parent around. You can then choose it from that list when it says none over underneath the column that says parent and link, or you can use the little pick whip to kind of click and drag and select that one. So let's go to select the TV layer. And then if you see just to the right of that, there is a number 7 because it's our 7th layer. Just a little bit over to that, there's kind of like a lavender colored square. Let's go ahead and click on that lavender colored square and you can choose a different color. So this is very, very useful for big files as well. You can actually choose a different color for it to show up on your timeline. So if I change this to like green, for instance, then the background and the object itself, kind of the bounding box around it will change to be green. So that's a useful one as well. So go ahead and change the color for fun. And then right next to that is a little drop-down arrow. So if you want to click that little drop-down arrow, you should see the word that says transform pop up. There should be a drop-down arrow next to the word transform as well. If you want to go ahead and click that one and click that to open it up, transform. You should then be able to see all of the things, the 5 things that we can animate without adding any effects at all. Effects are something different. We'll look at those here in a minute. But these are the 5 different things that we can animate on this object. Now, before we start doing our animation, let's talk about how you actually control the timeline, because this timeline itself can get a little bit confusing if you're not clear on it. So there's a couple different tricks that we'll do, and then we'll come back and jump into them. Do you guys see this one that says current time indicator? It's just this blue line. You can move this to advance yourself along the timeline anytime to sort of animate at different points in time. If you see that there are indicators behind that say 0s, 01s, 02s, 03s, those are saying that those are seconds. So 01, this would be 1 second, 2 would be 2 seconds, 3, 4, 5, and so on. And it should go about to 10 if you've changed that composition setting to be 10. So you go all the way from 0 to 10 seconds. There is an icon at the bottom of this window that looks like 2 little mountain ranges. And this is actually how you zoom into your time or zoom out. So if you can tell it's zoomed out all the way, you should be able to see 0 to 10. If I click and drag this little slider at the bottom, it will zoom in closer for me to be closer than that full view. If you click it all the way, you should see that your area changes to be now 01F, 02F. Those are frames. So that if you were doing like rotoscoping for potentially, this would be a space where you could actually affect individual frames. This is a great space to actually make corrections as well. So if you have something that kind of like does a weird movement and you don't want it to do that, you can come in and adjust the frames so that each one is perfect. I promise it's not that tedious normally, so no worries there. Let's go ahead and zoom back out. You should see that while you're doing that, there's also kind of a blue bar here at the top. This shows you where you are on the timeline. So if I zoom in partially so that I can see, maybe like the first, I don't know, couple seconds and some of the frames that are in there, I can actually move myself around the timeline while still being zoomed in from this little icon, as well as this slider bar at the bottom. Useful way to move yourself around in the timeline. There's also a space where you can simplify what you're looking at, which is this gray bar that's underneath the little diamond that's at the top, or I don't know, home plate, I guess. Home plate icon that looks like it's at the top as you can scroll here. And if you can tell, when I hover over the ends of this is my work area. If I interact with my work area, I can reduce the size of it by clicking and dragging on that little blue end. Not the one at the top that moves you around, but this actually limits what you're looking at. So when I hit play, which is spacebar, once we add a little animation in here, it will only pay attention to like the first 2 seconds if I limit it to 2. You can move this around, you can expand it back to 0, and just fill that space. We'll try that here together. So let's go ahead and start animating position. Now, since we're just going to look at position and we don't necessarily want to see all of the other ways that we can interact with this and to sort of save ourselves some space here at the bottom, let's go ahead and just close this transform box. So close the transform box, close that little diamond at the top, make sure your layer TV is selected, and then just hit the P button. When you hit the P button, it should just open just position. Cool. If you do that and you see next to the word position, there's what looks like a little stopwatch icon. This is how we're going to start animating. So I'm going to go ahead and click the stopwatch once. It should then turn blue. You should see over to the left of that icon that looks like a stopwatch, there's kind of a diamond there. And if you look now on your timeline, you should see that there's a blue diamond also wherever you put your cursor. Since this is where we want our icon to be, this is our TV, we want it to be centered in our composition. This is actually where we want it to be after we move it into the composition. So what I'm going to do is click and drag. If you want to watch along with me, if you're in After Effects, you want to switch to Zoom real quick so you can see. I'm going to click and drag this so that this little diamond is actually around the 2-second mark. So you can click and drag and move these diamonds around. They can be copy pasted. You can like copy paste and repeat things. We'll try that a little bit later. Now I also want to move my timeline so the timeline slider is still at 0 seconds, but I moved that position of where I'd like it to be at about 2 seconds, that diamond, that one diamond we have, to be under the 2-second mark. I hope I explained that clearly. I know I kind of like repeat myself sometimes, but hopefully that makes sense. This is kind of the basics. I want to make sure everyone's on the same page, make sure you understand this. Emoji, if you're okay so far. Okay. Cool, cool, cool. Excellent. Very good. So now what we're going to do is actually move the TV. I'm going to zoom out here a little bit so I can actually see some screen space over to the side. I'm going to use my V key to switch to my move tool. I'm just going to move this TV over so that I cannot see it within my kind of composition settings, my composition space there. So we just moved our TV over. You should see that a couple things happen when you did that. You should be able to see that there's 2 different points that show up, right? There's a position of where we want it to be at 2 seconds. There's a little line that connects those 2 points. So After Effects is amazing because it's going to do the animation in between those 2. So what I'd like you to do now is just hit spacebar. When you hit spacebar, it should slowly render. You'll notice that it fills up a little space kind of underneath your timeline setting, your composition timeline setting. There's a little green bar that'll fill up, and when it fills up, it'll start playing at its normal frame rate as best as it can, over zoom. Mine may look a little choppy because it's over zoom, but it'll just slide that TV in. It'll just slide it in. You can hit spacebar again to stop it, and then put your time slider back at 0. Or advance yourself along that time to see the motion as it does it, which is pretty cool. Now we want this to happen a little bit faster, and we kind of want to make it have a little bit more character. So I think this animation, this movement is like not really exciting at this point. It just kind of slides in, right? It's just very consistent, kind of boring. We want to give it a little personality. We kind of want it to like zoom in and kind of do a little wiggle, like the example. Now, since we're going to be working with just these first 2 seconds, this slider here that is my timeline ruler, as I hover over it, I can actually set this to be much lower in space because we don't need, past 2 seconds. If we're just dealing with animation space between 1 second and 2 seconds, that's all we need. That way, when we hit spacebar, and if I hit spacebar again, it will stop at the end of where this blue bar ends and then just repeat that. So then you can just really focus on fine-tuning the motion that you want to focus on temporarily. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and spacebar to start that again. All right. Good so far again, guys? Doing okay? Excellent. All right. Hey, we did it. We got a little motion already. That's kind of exciting. So as you can tell, if I click in this empty space, I can deselect my little diamonds. I can select them both. You can click and drag over top of your diamonds. If you want to select both of them, you can click on one and hold shift and click on another to be able to select more than one. So you can move these around, right? If I wanted to move these around and be at, start at 2 seconds, maybe we should do that. Maybe we want these to start at about 1 second. So it doesn't start with motion right away. There's a little bit of lag time where there's nothing on the screen. Give people time to kind of be like, okay, well, what's this? And then surprise them with something. So go ahead and move both of those over. So there's still a time of 2 seconds for this movement to happen, but it doesn't start until 1 second. It goes from 1 second to 3 seconds. And I'm going to go ahead and move my little workspace slider here so that I can focus on that area. All right. Next thing we want to do is be able to control how this motion happens. So I'm going to select both of these keyframes. These are called keyframes, these little diamonds that show up on our timeline. And what I'm going to do is open this section here. This is a graph editor. So I'm going to click this button and just follow along with me just for a second, and then we'll make sure it works, and then we'll let you do it as well. So I'm going to click that graph editor. You should see that this viewport within your timeline completely changes. It's got like a graph now. It starts at 0, goes up to minus 500 pixels a second. This is what's called a motion graph. We actually want to look at a different graph. And if you can see where I'm hovering over here, it says choose graph type and options. It's just a tiny little icon that looks like kind of a window with a couple different bullet points on it and some lines. It's right next to the big eye at the bottom if you were able to click your motion graph or your graph editor button. When I click that, I want to choose the speed graph. So you want to edit the speed graph. If yours is on value graph, it may look like a red and a green line. Mine was already on speed graph, so yours might have looked different to start with. If it looks like red and green, it may be that you're on the value graph and we want to look at the speed graph. So there I am to change it. You should see that there's two little gray points within your speed graph now that you're set to speed graph. And if I click on one of these, you should see that it changes to yellow and then kind of gives me a little handlebar. So this is very similar to like the vector system that you would use in Illustrator. What I want to do is I want this handlebar to be pulled out so that it happens a little bit faster. And as I'm doing that, I'm dragging down just a little bit. And in fact, what I'm going to do is drag this handlebar as far to the right as it'll let me go, and then drag this point all the way to 0. And what you should see happens with your speed graph is that it changes the shape of your motion so that you can give it a little bit more character. And after I've done all that, all I'm going to do is hit spacebar so I can see what it looks like. What it should do is that it should slowly ramp up in speed and then quickly zoom at the end into the space that we want it to be. So it's kind of like picking up speed. It's like picking up velocity or momentum and then really suddenly stop at the end. So now that I have that, I actually want to make this happen much faster. And I can do this in two ways. One way I can make this happen a little bit faster is that I can increase the peak of this little mountain on my speed graph by selecting the second point, position 2, where I actually want it to be in the center of my composition, and move this up on my speed graph. If you can tell, that'll actually, every time you click and drag and move it up and then let go, it will like increase the amount of pixels per second in motion that it's adding. So what you're doing is making it happen even slower at the beginning, and then all of a sudden very, very fast towards the end. We have not changed the distance between point A and point B. We've only changed where on the timeline it speeds to those positions. So just change.
Hey, Josh.
Yes.
So I'm in the speed, like edit speed graph, but I don't have any of those white lines or points in there at all.
Okay, are you sure you're on the speed graph and not the value graph?
Yes, it's checked on edit speed graph.
Edit speed graph, okay.
Probably don't have your keyframe selected.
That may be it. If you don't
Okay.
see anything, it might be that if you want to close the graph again, sort of the graph editor tab, make sure that you have those keyframes selected.
And then you have to, you also have to click on the line, like the pink line to get you have to click on the pink line first before you get the yellow things. That's what I had to do anyways. It didn't show up immediately.
Okay, I got it. We're good.
Yes,
Thanks,
awesome.
guys.
Yeah, thank you for the help, everyone. That's excellent. All right. Now, so this, again, one way that you could increase your speed that I'm trying to show you is by dragging this sort of second point up higher. And again, I'm choosing the second point because I want it to zoom very quickly at the end, right? I want it to be really fast at the end of this motion. Now, the other way we can speed this up is to reduce the time, right? So if we reduce the amount of time that it has to go from point A to point B, it will happen faster. So if I'm going to close this graph editor, now that we're done with the graph editor for a minute, I'll go ahead and close that. I should see that my keyframes actually have more motion added to them than before, right? The symbol is different. The symbol was a little diamond before, the keyframes were diamonds. These ones are showing you that they have edited speed in their speed graph to become kind of, I don't know what you call those, like Galactica little spaceships that are going sideways. But I'm going to click on the first one and just move it over. So now that my speed starts at like maybe 2 seconds instead of 1 second. So there's a motion time of just 1 second in between point A and point B instead of 2. So another way that you can speed up things is reduce the amount of time. And I'm going to go ahead and hit spacebar so we can see that. Zoom. Zoom. Cool. So we got a decent little like zooming effect. And so far we've gone over kind of most of the ways. There's maybe one more way we can edit the position of this. But most of the ways that we want this to function within this little animation here. All right, you guys ready to add some cool stuff real quick? I know this is super tedious and kind of boring, lame motion so far. Let's add some fun to it. So we're gonna mess around with the puppet pins. Ready? So let's advance to when the TV is just about to start to come into our composition. So if you can find the point on your timeline where it's about to start coming into the composition, maybe a little bit before, we're going to edit this with the puppet pins. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and select my layer. So make sure I have the TV selected. You can click on it in your layers tab by just selecting the TV. I'm going to go ahead and go up to my tools that are at the top. And the last one on the tools up here, if you should see, there's a home button, a little selection tool, there's a hand tool, a zoom tool, a few other tools. There's an anchor point tool, a motion, a pen tool and a rectangle tool, type tool. Some of the tools that you're probably familiar seeing, like an eraser and a stamp tool. This one right here is the puppet pin position tool. This one really, really fun. So you can add in a lot of character to this. So I'm going to click onto that one. It will allow me to add pins to this. Now it will remember over the course of the whole object where you put those pins. So I'm actually going to advance this time that I have that selected so that it's just sort of the stationary TV. And I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here just for a second so you guys can see this a little bit better. So I'm going to select my puppet pin again. I'm going to add some pins down here at the bottom. We're not going to animate all of them. We just need to add a little wiggle to the top. So I'm going to go ahead and click the puppet pin to add a pin here at the bottom. It's going to add, again, effects puppet. You should see that show up. There's kind of a mesh and some composition, a bunch of settings showed up at the bottom of your layers panel. Don't worry about those for now. I'm adding another puppet pin in the corner. These are ones I'm not going to move. And I'll probably put one in the middle just to make sure nothing gets, kind of wild or crazy at the end there. So I've got 3 pins at the bottom. We're not going to move these ones. And then I want to put 2 pins in the top. I want one in the top left-hand corner and one in the top right. And these are the ones that we're going to animate. Cool. Got it. Again, I wish I could see your screen so I know when you're like ready and stuff, but doing okay so far?
Hey, Josh.
Yep.
Sorry, I actually am not seeing where the puppet pins. Like,
Oh, no worries.
So it's in effects, right?
So it's actually not an effects. It's one of the tools.
Oh, okay.
So if you look
Okay.
at the very top left-hand corner of your screen, like where the hand icon is and the selection tool is, it's at the end of the tools list. It should
gotcha.
look like kind of, there's actually a puppet pin similar tool in Illustrator. I don't know if you've used it, but if you use that one, that's what the icon looks like. It looks like a push pin, that you'd put in like a board or something.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. You found it? Okay, excellent.
Mhm.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for asking. Again, I cannot see what you're working on, so I don't intend to leave anyone behind. I want to make sure everyone's finding what they're looking for. So yeah, puppet pin, yay. Okay, now again, I put 5 pins in, 3 on the bottom that I'm not going to move, 2 on the top that I will move. Now we need to find where these pins are going so that we can actually set them up on the timeline, because we can animate these pins. We can animate the position of the pins to stretch this object. And this is super exciting, you guys, because you get to actually add in some fluid motion to something that's already pretty rigid and square, right? And so this will kind of add a little delight because it surprises you in the sense that this is a kind of physical representation or icon of kind of like a TV, or supposed to be anyway. And it's very square, it seems very rigid, but we're going to add some fluid motion to it, which should be kind of like a fun thing to do. So what I'm going to do, if you just want to watch my screen real quick while we put this together, do you see these kind of gray lines that are intersections between kind of my viewport and my layers panel? You can actually drag this up and down so that you can see more of one or the other. And I really love doing this because it allows me to kind of see exactly what I want. Right, I'm kind of zoomed in on my TV. I don't need to see much else of the composition at this time. I just want to see the TV and kind of center it in smaller sections so I can see a little bit more of my layers down here at the bottom. When I do that, you should see, now that I still have my puppet pin tool open, there is an option that's kind of highlighted down here underneath the effect. And this may be what was the thing that was confusing there with the effects. It's adding an effect of a puppet, but we're using the tool to do it. There's a section here that says Mesh 1. Go ahead and open up by clicking the little arrow to the side that right next to where it says Mesh 1 to open that up. And you can open up the little arrow that says underneath there, Deform. Deform. And you should see now that on your timeline, if you move it around, you have a couple little pins that are showing up. They're little circles that are showing up which pins are where on the timeline. Do you guys see that? Thumbs up or emoji or shout at me if you can see that. Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. Okay, so you can see that those pins are actually being plotted on the timeline. You're adding time and motion to the pins themselves. Now we only need to move puppet pin number 5 and puppet pin number 4. If you did them in the same order that I did, right? They'll be pinned based on the order that you add them. You know, 1 first, 2 second, etc. So the 2 last ones I did 3 in the bottom first and then 2 on the top. Puppet pin 4 and 5 are the ones that we want to animate. So those are the 2 that we want to open up. And now you can see why it would be really useful to be able to use like the tilde and stuff to be able to zoom in on your layers panel and things and to be able to resize your screen, because the layers panel gets really, really kind of wild pretty quickly. So you should see now that we've opened those up that there's a stopwatch timer that's already started for the position of our TV puppet pins. Cool. Now I did my puppet pins on the position where I want the TV to be eventually, right? We don't want it to have any wiggle when it stops moving. We want it while it's coming in to kind of lean back like it's going really fast. When it hits that spot, we want it to kind of bounce and then we want it to stop. So we want it to stop. We want it to be its standard size, its original position when we're starting this. So I did hit those pins when it was done with the motion. And I'm going to be really cautious and kind of careful to make sure that I put these over to the side. And again, if you could see, I just like kind of drag selected over both of those pins at the same time. Since there's nothing in between, I'm not selecting anything else. I just drag those over so that I know that that's the position of the pins. The position of the pins are relative to the center of the object. So you guys see there's kind of a crosshair in the center of the object. That's what it's relative to. So when you move these things around, even though I'm moving the TV, the puppet pins will only move relative to this. This is called the anchor point. You can move the anchor point, and I will show you how to do that later. Probably not today, but that is something that can move, and these puppet pins are relative to the position of that anchor point. Good so far? All right, so now I want to go backwards in my timeline until I can't see the TV on my composition. And again, I'm trying to kind of manage my screen space by making it so I can see the puppet pins, where they are, kind of on my timeline, and so that I can see the TV in my viewport. What I'm going to do is select just one of these puppet pins, or both of them if you want to do them both at the same time. And I'm just going to click and drag and kind of lean them back. So lean them away from the direction that the TV is going in. So I'm pushing them to the right. I've also, you should see that I've set up a new timeline position for that. Okay, I have something that's messing up a little bit, and that's okay. We're going to talk about how to fix this. Do you guys see that like my mask is not bending with the TV? Do you guys see that right here? It's like kind of messing up. That mask is like not bending with the TV. It's not following the puppet pins. What I'm going to do is actually, we don't need the mask yet. So I'm just going to turn the eye off on that layer just for now, just for a second. And I'll turn the eye off again for the logo as well. We'll animate those separately. We'll make sure that they're invisible for this part of the exercise. So let's just focus in on the TV. We'll do motion of one thing at a time. Cool, good so far? So we're adding in some position. Again, all we're animating is position. We're animating the position of the TV, and then we're also animating the position of some pins that we added to the TV to give it a little bit of a fluid motion. Now this looks okay. It's not super exciting. It kind of just slides in and then corrects itself. What we want it to do is while it's sliding in is to have this kind of a really extreme lean back, like it's zooming really fast. When it hits the spot where the position of the TV is set and it stops, we want it to then swing forward really far, right? So it looks like it has that kind of momentum that kind of gives it that wiggle. So find the spot where the TV kind of swings forward. We want it to swing forward, probably right about there. And then what I'm going to do is go ahead and select my pins again, selecting my TV layer, go ahead and selecting my deform layers in my tab because I kind of got sidetracked by turning the eye off on my logo and TV mask. So if nothing is selected and you don't see the pins, don't panic, don't worry. Just click on your layer of the TV that has the pins on it. Click on under effects, click puppet, click mesh one, click deform, and you should be able to see those puppet pins pop up again. Good so far? Still tracking with me okay? This is kind of fun yet? Just a quick update, is it kind of fun yet? It's kind of fun. I mean, it's a little tedious and we're going kind of slow, but it's kind of exciting, kind of fun. We're getting a little wiggle. This is fun. All right, so what I want to do is go ahead and select both those pins So I'm going to click on one. I'm going to hold shift and click on the other one. And right about where I want it to advance here, I'm just going to click and drag both of those to swing forward the other way. So I got a little wiggle there. That's okay. Now we want it to really bounce back the other way. So I'm just going to advance my time slider just a slight bit, just a tiny bit, just a little bit, and then go ahead and pull those back the other way, back to the right. And then repeat this process, right? I'm going to kind of like get it to kind of bounce a little bit. We want it to bounce a little bit more at the beginning and a little bit less each time. We're kind of advancing our timeline just a little bit to kind of get it to like feel like it kind of bounces really fast, and then just like kind of like a pendulum kind of come to rest in the middle. So I've just added a couple pin positions by clicking and dragging to get them to kind of come to rest there. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into where my timeline is here. I want to make sure that I can see that the animation starts. Let's just start at 0 seconds so we can kind of get the feel for the weight there. I'm going to advance this workspace slider here so that I can see maybe almost 4 seconds or so of this animation. Then what I'm going to do is go ahead and zoom out just a tad so I can kind of get the effect here. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit the play button, which is spacebar, to see how it looks. Boing. I don't know if you can see it very good. I know Zoom just has a terrible frame rate, and I'm sorry about that. You probably can't see it at all, can you? Okay. Looks cool on my screen. Let's see if it works for you guys. I will try to let me just scrub through this really slowly if you're looking at mine still, so that you can kind of see what it looks like. I have a little bit of an error, and I'm going to correct it, and that's okay. All right, so there was a little error, and this is why we do this, right? This is why we limit our time, our timeline, our space, so we can double check to make sure that this animation is working the way we would intend. Let me go ahead and show you what my little error is here. So if I scrub with my timeline, what's happening is the space. Let me see if I can zoom in here. I can't zoom in on Zoom. That's so frustrating. Okay, so the space here, the zoom space right here, where there's nothing in between these two keyframes, where there's a lot of space in between those two keyframes. If you can tell, there's not a lot of distance between the position of the pins relative to the TV. Let me see if I can explain this. So these are all relative to the center of the TV, right? If I just move these puppet pins just a little bit to the right and just a little bit to the left, there's not a lot of motion happening there. It's just a little wiggle, right? But when I'm doing this over a lot of time, that means it can move kind of slowly over those 2 times. And if you could tell, when it's coming into our composition, it's already leaning to the left. That's not the motion that we want, right? That's not what we want. We want it to kind of lean back like it's going really fast. So what I need to do is duplicate or copy the position of these pins so that it is the same position up until I want it to actually start bouncing forward, which is like right there. That's where I want it to start bouncing forward. So I want to reduce the distance in my timeline. I want to reduce the amount of time before it starts and stops that position. So I can make a copy, or I could just move these over, but I'm going to go ahead and make a copy just so we can kind of copy paste. So I'm going to select one of these at a time. I'll hit Command C and then Command V. I'm on the timeline where I want it to be. Now it messed up because it's, you know, just on one side at a time. I'll hit select this again, click and drag, or click on that keyframe. I hit Command C or Control C if you're on a PC, and Command V or Control V to paste. There we go. That's what I want it to do, right? I want it to kind of lean back until it gets to like right here and then kind of wiggle and zoom forward. So yes, that was a little bit tedious. I hope it was kind of fun and worth it to be able to get that little wiggle. It took us a little bit, and we did have to fine tune it just a little bit to kind of, you know, get it to kind of do the wiggle that we want. But I'm hoping that that was kind of fun, and it shows you a little bit of the process, right? I had a vision of kind of a motion that I wanted to add in. I wanted to kind of zoom in from off the screen and do a little kind of bounce wiggle when it centers itself. It took me a little bit to kind of get in the tools to set up, to be able to set up that motion, and then I just fine-tuned that motion by paying attention to what is happening in the animation just a little bit at a time, kind of scrubbing back and forth. We call it scrubbing when you're just moving, you're clicking and dragging, moving that timeline slider back and forth. I'm just kind of scrubbing back and forth to make sure that that motion is doing what I intended. It's a little bit warped at the bottom because of the way that these pins interact with each other. Do you guys see this little wiggle at the bottom? That's a little issue that I could correct as well. The one way to be able to fix that would be to sort of go back to the original position and then just add a couple more pins that we do not move. So you can sort of like pin those in place, if that makes sense. So the pins themselves can be things that you add motion to, or kind of like stop things from having motion. So I could add a couple pins to this. And that should fix it. Yep, I fixed it. It's not wiggly on the bottom anymore. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close this TV. We'll kind of stop playing around with it for now. So you can actually close these, deform section. You can close the puppet pins. You can close the mesh. You can close it all the way from the top if you want to just like close the effect entirely. You should then be able to see just kind of where those little dots are in your timeline and see where the position is set up for your TV. So you got back a little bit of space in our timeline here.
I would also recommend having multiple save files, because sometimes Adobe's programs crash and
Yes.
and you could lose all your data.
That is a really good suggestion. Should we go ahead and do a save real quick? Let's do that. Excellent. Thank you. That is a fantastic suggestion. So yeah, if you go up to the file section and just go ahead and hit save, or save as if you want to choose like a specific location. This is a great spot to do a save. Thank you. Excellent suggestion, Jasmine. All right, so I'm going to just call this one TV bounce and reveal. I mean, you can call it whatever you want. Demo 1 or something. Whatever you like. Yep, good call, good call. Definitely want to save. Command S, Control S. Excellent. Wiggly TV. Boing. All right. So next thing I want to do is actually turn on the logo and the mask eye. Now, if you remember again, because the mask and the TV and the logo position are sort of being not bent by the puppet pins that are on the TV, those are kind of causing a little bit of a traction issue, right? So that doesn't look good. So actually what I want to do is make sure that these items do not show up until the TV is done moving entirely. So once the TV is done, we want to make sure that these shows up. And there is a way to do that so that you don't have to worry about seeing a layer when you don't want it to be visible. One way to do that would be use like the opacity setting and sort of animate the opacity so it doesn't show up until a particular time. But there's another way to do that, and that is to click on those layers in the timeline section here. You do need to be a little bit accurate about where you click on this, because you can move these around, and moving them around will not have the same effect. But if you click and drag right here where you have a left and right arrow, you can reduce the size of the layer itself so that it does not show up until a particular time. And what that means is that that layer just does not exist on your composition until you get to the spot where that kind of bar is there. So you can do that for both of these so that it is just not even a part of your composition until you actually want it to be, which is after the wiggle. After the wiggle is finished. Do you want to make sure that those at least line up so that then your logo doesn't all of a sudden flash onto the screen? And we can be ready to start animating the next section of this little demo here. So what we actually want to do now is make a copy of our mask layer, because we're going to use the mask layer for a couple different sort of motion tactics. One of those things that we're going to do here is add static to the background of the TV. So there's kind of like a little bit of an effect there. So it looks like the TV turns on and there's a little static there. That should be pretty fun. So let's go ahead and do that. What we want to do is copy the mask shape for the TV. So just make sure you have the whole layer selected by clicking on the layer name. You can hit Command C or Control C, and then Command V or Control V. There you go. So now I have 2, right? I've got a mask shape for the TV 2. So I just duplicated that square. So what happens when you make a copy of this is that it's just copying it with none of its links from before. So if you remember, we set up a parent and a link in the parent and link section of this particular mask shape for the TV, so that when we animate the TV as it starts off to the side of the screen and kind of zooms in into the center of the screen, that piece, that layer is in the position that it should be in the center of the TV. If I copy and paste that, if you can tell, what it does is it actually puts it in its original position, which is off to the side of the screen. We do not want it to do that. And so to make sure that it's linked at the particular position that we'd like it to be relative to the TV, we want to make sure that we go back to the 0, 0 position with our timeline. And then under the parent and link section, make sure we relink this new layer that is mask shape for the TV2 to the TV itself. Yeah, and thank you for asking that. So now we can see that when that layer is ready to appear and kind of pop up, it is in the center of the screen.
Josh, your TV looks a little
A
warped.
little wonky,
still.
yeah, it sure does. Let's see if we can fix that. Cool. So let's go into the effects. I believe there is a reset button for the puppet right here. And we actually want it to reset at this point. So let me go ahead and hit reset and see if that fixes it. There we go. Better, right? There we go. We didn't lose any of our motion, but we just reset the pins. That happens sometimes, especially with puppet pins, because you kind of like wiggle everything so much that at the end it doesn't quite fit perfectly. It was a little warped at the bottom. Good eye, by the way, good eye. Yeah, so now I've installed sort of a reset by setting it where I want it to be reset and then just clicking that reset button. It's actually underneath effects right next to the word puppet, and it just has kind of a blue reset button. Good job, Adobe, for adding a reset button, because that was a helpful fix there instead of trying to, fiddle with it or something, to trying to get it to like line up. Yeah, good eye, good eye, good eye. All righty. Ready to add an effect? We'll add our first like actual effect. So what we're going to do is actually add a little static here. I would like to move this mask shape for TV2 to be beneath the logo. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the mask shape for TV1, the original, and the logo. And let's go ahead and just rename this layer, because it's a mask shape for TV, for the TV number 2 is a lot to say. So I'm going to go ahead and just rename this one. If you right click on it and then go down, you can choose rename. Let's just call this one static effect, because we're going to add in a static effect on that shape. So you should see over on the right-hand side of your screen, or at least in my screen, and I don't know if your guys' layout is a little bit different because I've probably messed with this a little bit, but see if you can find one that says effects. Not effect controls, but in this case, effects and presets. Are our screens kind of set up the same, or is it a little bit different? It's the same? Okay, cool. So there's like so many effects. And I just want to, if you just want to watch with me, there's like a distort section. Look at all these different kind of distorts that are just in the distort section. Like there's a ton of these. Full disclosure, I have not used all of them. Like there's a whole section for color correction. If you want to like colorize, like in horror movies, they kind of have like this green color effect over top of the footage. So it seems kind of eerie. That's very intentional that they do it that way. But those are color effects that they're added in After Effects. There's a little section for Cinema 4D. There are some amazing kind of like 3D controls that we can jump into. I honestly haven't used them a whole lot yet, so I'm kind of excited to explore that space. There's blur and sharpening. There's like keying and matting and noise and grain. You can actually just search for these as well, but the noise and grain section is what we're going to be using. We're going to add grain to this. So you can actually scroll down and find noise and grain, or you can just type in grain, or if I spell it correctly. There we go. So on the search at the top under effect, you can add grain. And that's what we want to do, is just add grain. We're going to kind of add in a grain effect. So I'm going to just click and drag this down to the layer that I want it to have, which is the static effect layer that we've renamed there. And just click and just sort of click and let go. And that will start adding the static effect, or the grain effect, that will kind of manipulate to look like static. And you should see that where your project panel was, if you can see on my screen here, the project panel, it's sort of changed to be into a panel that says effect controls. And that's kind of the effect controls section of that. And you should see that there's a view mode. There's a section where it says presets. There's a section underneath where it says tweaking, popped up, and it says intensity, size, softness, aspect ratio, channel intensities, channel size. You guys see that okay? So what I'm going to do is actually just play around with this if you want to. You can just set it. You can like increase the size of these. You can click and drag on the numbers to make them have more colors. You can increase the softness so it's a little bit blurry. You can change the aspect ratio if you want to. And then what happens when you actually play this is that is set in motion. It's like this constant kind of wiggle wave. And a lot of these effects are ways that you can get like smoke effects, and you can add in snow and rain. You can add in you know, a lot of different ways. There's so many different ways to use these because just those 4 different things that you could animate. I mean, you can animate them over time. We're going to do that here in just a second, but you can change the intensity and size and softness of this so that it changes over time. But I'm just going to advance my video here just a little bit so that I can see what this kind of static effect is doing. It is in preview mode, so you should see that there's kind of like a square in the middle that's just showing you a preview of what's going to happen on the screen once you set this. I don't know if you can see my screen. I know the frame rate, you know, drops suddenly when I'm trying to play something in After Effects, but it should have this kind of crazy little wiggle effect when you're in there. And I'll go ahead and stop that just for a second. To be able to set this, we need to stop it from being in preview mode. So if you can see underneath in your effect controls, where it says add grain and it says viewing mode, you can change that off of preview and just go ahead and hit final output. When you change that to final output, it should apply that effect over the entire layer. And this is really useful, of course, you know, if you're fully rendering something or trying to render something, that you can kind of set up the effect you want it to have without having to affect the entire screen. Like sometimes you want to add like kind of like a dust effect or like a grain effect or, you know, kind of like some scratches looking things over top of your footage and things like that. This is a way to do that. And you can sort of set it up so that it's not, you know, impacting the full screen all at once until you have it set the way that you want it to. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit play. And I would encourage you guys to try and hit play because I know, you know, my preview on my Zoom screen is not gonna be very good for you. You should be able to see this kind of like a zooming screen effect. Just like a blur of colors depending on how you set up the intensity and size and softness and aspect ratio. So it kind of looks like static, which is kind of cool. If you turn down some of these settings, so make it a little bit not quite as large, you can also, there are some presets in here that you can change it to be different kind of like color settings. So like color negative will like kind of knock out the color so it looks a little bit more like TV static, you know, like those old TVs. You can turn down the softness so it's a little bit more harsh. It'll be a little bit more grainy. There we go. Ooh, that one looks kind of cool. I don't know. Just play around with it and see what you can do with the colors. It's kind of neat. Come up with some neat little effects. This looks like stars or something. I'm trying to let mine play. It's kind of rendering and getting a little bit slow in this. There you go. I'll just kind of scrub back and forth so you can kind of see the effect, I think. I think that's a little bit easier for you guys to see if I just kind of go back and forth with my timeline instead of trying to hit the play button. Do you guys see that kind of like wiggling and changing and, you know, sparkles or something? Cool. So that was our first effect. We did the grain effect. You can kind of play around with some of those settings if you want to, and kind of have a lot of fun with that, honestly. But what we want to do is try and make this so that we don't see it all at once over top of the entire screen, right? I think what we were trying to affect or go for, we wanted to start it as kind of like a little tiny circle in the center of that kind of screen there. And we want that circle to get bigger really quickly so that we can see the full thing. So what we're going to use is the track matte settings to be able to add a shape. We're going to add our first shape layer so that we can add a track matte to that shape so that the static effect will follow and only be visible where that circle is. So that's our next little task here. You guys need to stretch real quick? My shoulder, my like left shoulder hurts every time I do this for some reason. I don't know why. Is doing okay? Pretty good? Okay, awesome. All right, so let's go ahead and add our first shape. Now, there's a couple different ways to do this, and if you don't mind, just follow along with my screen just for a second. I want to show you kind of what not to do. Under this rectangle tool option, the hotkey for this one is Q, I can choose an ellipse. Now, this is great, except that I still have the static effect layer selected. If you can see my cursor, do you see that extra little box that's right next to my cursor there? It's actually the mask symbol from Photoshop. Do you guys remember that mask symbol from Photoshop when you're adding a mask? It's telling me that I'm actually adding a mask to the layer, to the static effect layer. Now, the reason we don't want to do that is because masks allow you to control them with the anchor points, just like you would in Illustrator. So they'll have like a point and a handle. And if you remember what a circle looks like with anchor points, it's 4 anchor points and they all have different handle lengths. We don't want to have to edit a mask of anchor points. It will be very tedious and kind of time consuming. The cool thing about that is you can customize any shape you want out of a mask anytime. But let me just go ahead and show you what it looks like to add a mask. So I'm just going to click and drag. You can tell now that it's added a mask to my static effect. It's natively set to add. There are different kinds of masks that you can add: subtract, intersect, lighten, darken, difference. Those are kind of like the blending modes in Photoshop or Illustrator. Right now it's just set to add, which means I can only see the static effect happening on this layer. This layer is only visible inside the mask. Now I can go down and edit the mask path, but what that's going to do if I zoom in here is you can tell that these are the points that I would have to edit to be able to change the mask shape. And that's going to be too tedious for us to do to change the shape, but you can fully edit a mask. I mean, you can do anything you want, right? You can make a cool, like, I don't know, wiggle shape, which when my computer like catches up, it will add that shape. Now I'm going to Control Z and go back because I don't want to add a mask this way. And I just wanted to show you that you can add a mask that way, but what we want to do is deselect all of our layers. We want to add a new shape layer. When you click that, you should see now that my icon with no layers selected is a little star icon. That means you're adding a new layer that is a shape. That's what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and try and put a circle in the center of this TV. And I'm clicking and dragging. I can hold down the space bar if I want to move it around instead of changing its shape while I'm still clicking and dragging, just the same way you can when you're creating a shape in like Illustrator. I can hold Shift to make sure it's perfectly symmetrical, just like you can in Illustrator or Photoshop. Hold down Shift and space bar to make sure it centers itself, and I'll just go ahead and drop it off in the center there. And you should see now on our
Hey,
layers.
Josh.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Oh, so I still can't find the how to change what the static looks like. Like, I can't find that.
That panel of effect
Yeah.
controls. So you were successful in adding the effect, but can't find where to change the effect, right?
Yes.
Okay, no worries. So let's go ahead and go up to your window menu and see if you can find one that says effect controls.
My window. Yeah, it's not a window either. I have effects and presets, essential graphics.
So it's actually
Oh, wait,
below
there.
that list. It's sort of the second list towards the bottom of that panel that says effect controls.
Static.
Yeah, and if you have the static layer selected, it will show you the effect control panel for that layer.
Okay.
I just
Yeah, I
closed
found
mine.
that.
Good. And so when we're actually making these changes, do you see on your screen? It's on my screen in the top left-hand corner. I don't know if it goes to the same place. Did it go to the same place for everyone else? Kind of the same space? Okay. So you should see the change the settings. It's actually under tweaking. And I'm changing the numbers. I'm clicking and dragging on the blue numbers next to intensity, size, softness, and aspect ratio. And I'm just like clicking and dragging crazy, like, you know, just kind of testing it out and see what happens.
Oh, okay.
Awesome. Great question. Thank you for asking. All right, so what I want to do now is I'm going to go ahead and switch to my selection tool. I want to make sure that I have my layer shape 1 selected. I want to move this layer down so that it is just above the static effect layer. When I've done that, I can actually switch toggles and modes down here at the bottom. Make sure that I can see one that says track matte instead of the shy guy, right? So like the shy guy control button will disappear. It should say track matte, TRKMAT. And what I want to do is add a track matte to the static effect of an alpha matte of the shape layer 1. This is going to make it so, again, that layer becomes the mask. And that's what we want. It's an alpha, it's called an alpha track matte of the layer that is directly above static effect. And you should see that there's a couple mask looking icons that show up. This is very similar to creating a layer mask, or I'm sorry, not a layer mask, a clipping mask in Illustrator or a clipping mask in Photoshop. Everyone able to get that to work okay? Do you want me to repeat that process, or is everybody okay on that one?
Can you repeat it?
I can, yeah, certainly. Okay, one second. Let me go ahead and back up and hit Command Z a couple times. So again, we added a shape layer. Good on that, or do you want me to back up before that?
Give me a second. I can't find the shape layers. I'm in the layer
fine.
panel and I almost made a mask of the
Yes.
static, but I can't.
That's okay.
Yes.
So if I make sure you do not select any layers, so go ahead and deselect all your layers by clicking sort of off in your layers panel in an empty space. What I'm going to go ahead and do then is select my shape tool, which is actually Q on your keyboard. If you hit Q, it should select the tool. But we actually want to click and hold down the button on that tool to be able to select the ellipse tool as well.
Okay, and then I just draw a circle in it.
Yeah, you can click and drag. You should see a little star icon next to the circle, the cursor as you click and drag that circle on. I'm just going to try and center it up by holding down spacebar to move it around, holding down shift to make it perfectly symmetrical as I'm doing that. Probably make it kind of small. I think you can hold down option as well if you want to kind of drag from the center. Nope, option is not working.
It's command to draw from the center.
Cool, thank you. Sweet.
Yep.
Okay, so I got a circle on there. Again, the next step after that you've drawn a circle is to move that shape layer, that circle layer, down so it is directly above the layer that you want it to be a track matte of, right? So that it's going to create that shape layer to be the mask for this layer, which means we can animate the shape itself, which is going to make it really easy for us to just increase the scale, right? One of the scale properties. That's one of our second properties now. We've animated a lot with position. We want to try and do some stuff with scale. So if you don't see again if you still see the like Shy Guy menu and there's like an effect button, you can add blur in here. We'll get into all that, I promise. But if you don't see where it says track matte at the top of the column, there's a button at the bottom that says toggle switches and modes. You can click that until you see mode. And then right next to mode, there should be a little letter T. And right next to that, there should be TRKMAT, track matte. And we want to choose the track matte on the static effect layer that is now one layer beneath the shape layer by changing that where it says none to alpha matte shape layer 1. And now that is our layer. That is our layer with the shape. Now the shape is also invisible, right? You don't see it. If it doesn't work for you, just a quick note here, guys, you do need to make sure that the fill is set to fill in on the interior of that shape. You can turn off the stroke and fill options. If you have your shape layer selected, they should show up at the top of your screen, kind of like the little menu bar at the top. There's an option where it says fill. You can turn off the stroke if you click on the word stroke and set it to none. You do want to make sure it has a fill of something. It doesn't matter what the color is or anything like that.
So I keep trying to add the circle with it having its own layer, and it keeps wanting to go on the static and create a mask.
Mm-hmm. You do need to make sure that you deselect the layer before you add the shape. So you can do that by clicking off of everything, making sure that there's nothing selected.
I did, but every time I go to click on the thing to draw the circle, it reselects the static.
Shoot, okay. Let me think for a minute.
Let's see.
You can also go to the layer option, the layer menu at the top of the menu options, and choose new and then solid. Or shape layer is also an option. So you can choose a new shape layer. That may be an option. That may fix it for you.
Try now. There we go.
Yay, awesome. Okay. So what we want to do is at the beginning of where we want the static to appear, we want to change the scale of this circle to be a lot smaller, right? So I'm just going to open up the scale property of this shape layer. The hotkey for the scale property is actually just S. So you can just hit the S key as long as you have the shape layer selected to be able to open up the scale property. I'm going to go ahead and hit the timeline stopwatch. And if you're feeling comfortable so far with kind of the demos on how this could be done, go ahead and try and make it so the circle is really small to start with. Advance your timeline just a little bit so that it kind of turns on, right? Kind of just boo, and then turns on. So you can turn the scale down by clicking and dragging on these numbers to make the circle smaller proportionally to the center of that anchor point where the anchor point is. Advance your timeline to just a little bit ahead. We don't want it to take too much time to be able to do this motion, and then just increase the scale of the circle to fill your screen really. So in that short amount of time, it should start off at a little circle and then kind of bong. You know, if we had sound effects, it would, you know, you could add a little sound effect.
Can you repeat that one more time? I
Sure,
missed
yeah.
it.
No problem, no problem. Let me back up. So I haven't added anything yet. You want to just go ahead and select your shape layer. So make sure you have the shape layer 1 selected. If you want to open up just the scale property, and that is just to make sure you have the shape layer selected, and all you have to hit is just the S key on your keyboard. So just hit that once and that should open up the scale property and nothing else underneath the shape layer 1. And if it's easier, guys, I always am a big fan of kind of renaming your layers. We can rename shape layer 1 to be like static effect mask or something like that, which would be a little bit more accurate.
Hey Josh, can you repeat how you add the mask again? I'm a little behind.
No, yeah, no problem. So we add the mask by adding in a shape layer. The way that I did that when I back up here is make sure first I have nothing selected. I want to go up and select my circle, my ellipse tool. It's actually underneath the rectangle tool. So make sure you select the ellipse tool underneath there. You should see next to your cursor, kind of this crosshair icon, there should be a little star icon. If you see a different icon that's not a star, if it's like a circle and a square, that means you're adding a mask. But you should see a star, and then I'm just going to click and drag to add a circle in there. And then just kind of position my circle so it's, you know, kind of centered on the TV.
Right, I got the shape.
Perfect, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to drag the shape down so that that layer is above the static effect layer, because it can only do the track mag as long as that layer is right above the one that you want it to have. Then at the bottom where it says toggle and switches, click that button until you see the option to choose a track mat. It should be TRK-MAT, kind of middle column center. So you can hit that toggle switches and modes button until you see track mat. And then under the static effect layer itself, under where it says none, underneath the column that says track mat, you want to choose alpha mat shape layer 1. Or it may say something different, but whatever the name is for your shape layer, it will allow you to make that the mask. All we want to do then is just go ahead and select your shape layer, hit S key to select your scale property. And then I'm going to use my timeline to kind of jump to the position where I'd like the TV to kind of turn on, right? So where's the beginning of the TV static effect? I'm going to go ahead and find that in my timeline. I'm going to hit the stopwatch on the scale effect underneath shape layer 1 to start animating. You should see then a keyframe pops up underneath that layer. I want to reduce the size of the scale by kind of making the circle a little bit smaller so it's not quite as large. In this case, you know, like 20% or 30% or something in there. So it's just a little bit smaller circle. I'll go ahead and advance my timeline until I'd like it to sort of fill the screen with static, like the TV's turning on. This is kind of like one of those old bubble TVs when you turn on, there's a little circle in the middle and it kind of just gets bigger with static for a second. And I'm just going to go ahead and increase the size of that circle by clicking and dragging on those blue numbers until it's bigger than the size of the screen.
Got it.
Awesome. So if you can tell, the scale here, the property has a little link symbol next to it. One of these is going to be kind of the scale vertically, and one of them is going to be the scale horizontally, but they're just linked right now because that little chain link is clicked. So when I click and drag on one number, it's going to increase the size of both numbers. And this is a common thing that happens in After Effects, is that you can click and drag on the numbers themselves rather than having to like type in a value. You can just kind of click and drag and then move to the left or to the right. If you can see, when you hover over those, it shows up with a little hand icon, and then there's kind of a left and right arrow. So you can tell that that is something you can interact with. Most numbers or any value that you see that is a blue, that blue color, is something that you can click and drag on to manipulate. And it's just so much faster, you know, to just like kind of click and drag on that thing. Yay. We got a stat effect, you guys. How fun is that? Boom. Cool. I'm excited. I'm having a blast. I hope you guys are having a good time. It's so satisfying to be able to make things move on the screen. I know, you know, you didn't get to design the artwork, and that will be a lot of the fun too, is making your own art that you then get to you know, add animation to, and that is a lot of the fun as well. So, you know, I know this is just a demo and it's maybe not as fun and kind of a little slow, but hang with it, guys. We'll get to the cool stuff here pretty soon. All right, so I got that turning on, right? And I wanted this to happen pretty quickly. So I'm actually going to reduce the space between these two keyframes to make sure that it just happens real fast. And then I'm just going to test my animation. And it may not be able to see it on my screen very much. But again, you want to try and make a change, try to test it on your screen, hit spacebar so you can kind of play your video and make sure that it's playing the way that you want it to. Okay, so now we have our kind of static effect, right? That is the shape of the TV, because we made a shape that was the same size as the TV screen. We're adding in this little effect. Now let's go ahead and add some opacity in here. And since we want to edit scale and opacity at the same time, we want to see them both underneath this shape layer, or underneath the static effect, really, rather. I'm going to hold down or hit the T key to open up opacity. It's actually transparency. The O key is something else. So hit T to open up transparency or opacity in this case. We want to open this up underneath the static effect. So the mask is fine. The mask doesn't need to like appear or disappear by any means. We just want to make sure that the static effect itself kind of disappears because we don't need it to stay on the screen. So I'm going to animate the opacity by clicking the timeline stamp. We want to make sure that this timeline is something we move backwards in time towards the beginning of our timeline so that it is at 100% so that we can see it while it's popping up. And then we'll add another keyframe where we are in our timeline here by reducing this number to 0. So now that static effect is going to kind of turn on and disappear at the same time, right? So we have this kind of like turn on effect. It's going to open up as if it's sort of like this little circle that kind of appears and then gets bigger while it also sort of fades away. And that's kind of the effect that we're looking for before we reveal our logo. And again, I'm sorry the frame rate on Zoom drops quite a lot, so hopefully you can see that okay as I kind of scrub it back and forth. Did I do that too fast? Is everyone okay with that opacity setting? It starts off at 100%. I added another keyframe somewhere else down the timeline that's not too far away. It is after the circle effect has increased in scale to the size that we want it, and then just reduced that opacity setting to 0. Cool. All right. If there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and move on. So now we want to add on our logo, right? So let's go ahead and turn on the logo layer. Now the logo, we also don't want it to be visible to start with, and we want it to sort of start somewhere else. And we also need to set up so that it has a track mat of the mask shape for the TV, right? We want to kind of have it kind of bounce into the scene, bounce into the scene so that we can see it on the TV. And we want it to happen kind of in the similar space here. So I'm going to go ahead and select my logo layer. With the track mat still open, I'm going to choose the track mat of the layer right above it, which is alpha mat for mask shape for the TV. Go ahead and set our track mat there. So the layer above it now is the track mat for the logo. So if any of the logo moves, or if we're about to move it here in just a second, outside of the TV screen space, it will not be visible. It'll be a mask for the mask shape for the TV. All right, so let's open up the position, the opacity, and the scale for the logo layer. So to open up multiple of these, you could just drill down, right? It's called drilling down by hitting these little arrows and open up transform, but it's going to open up a few that we don't need to see. So just go ahead and hit T to start with because we want to see opacity. Then you can hold the Shift key and hit S. While still holding Shift, you can hit P. So now I have position, scale, and opacity, and only those three things open at the same time. You do have to start by just clicking one. So don't hold Shift, click one like T to open up transparency. Hold Shift, hit S, and then P. Now I'm going to start the stopwatch on all of these because I want to start animating all of them at the same time. We're going to try and speed this up a little bit. So I've got all three of those animating. I'm actually going to go ahead and move my WSU below the TV. And as you move it down below the TV, you should see that it kind of disappears as it breaches kind of the edge of where that mask is that's above it. I'm going to reduce the size of the scale. I can do that a couple different ways. If you can tell, there's a bounding box or a little bit of a bounding box outside of this. If I actually just click and drag on one of these little corner squares that are kind of around this bounding box, you can reduce the scale that way. You can also change the number in your layer name. I'm sorry, am I going too fast?
Yeah, I'm struggling with moving the WSU's logo down.
Okay, yeah, no worries. Let me go ahead and go back here. Did you open up the position? Let me back up. Getting overwhelmed. Okay, I'm sorry. You want me to do those one at a time? I try to do 3 at a time. Maybe that's not a good idea. Okay, I'm backed up, right? So I've got, did everyone get the track mat set on the logo okay?
Yes.
All right, excellent. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and advance from there. So did you get position, scale, and opacity open okay? Excellent. I've seen some nods. Let me know if that's not true. Now, when we're setting our position and our scale and our opacity, we actually want this logo to be in the spot it is originally, right? It's in the center of our TV. We want that to be where it is eventually. So I'm just going to turn on the stopwatch for all 3 of these. And the stopwatch is, again, is right next to the word position, scale, and opacity, just to the left of it. There's a little kind of gray stopwatch icon. When you click it, it turns blue. And that should start adding in your keyframes onto your timeline. Now, since this is where we want the logo to be, I'm sorry, I'll stop talking there so you can just do that. Everybody get that okay? Got those stopwatches started? Okay, you should see then that the keyframes are there. I'm going to go ahead and just click and drag all 3 of these keyframes, or you can click and drag one at a time if you want to, and just move them, advance them in our timeline just a little bit, just past the static effect. Right, so the static effect is now disappearing. That's about where we want to start seeing the WSU logo show up. So just past that a little bit, you can kind of scrub through with your timeline until you find the position and kind of where you want it to start being. That's where you want it to be eventually, kind of where that static stops. Then we want to be able to see clear the nice little WSU logo there. So all I did was just, move the keyframes. Okay. Okay, go ahead and move on. So I'm going to back up on my timeline a little bit to where I don't want to see the WSU logo, right? So I don't want it to appear yet or kind of pop out. I'm trying to get it to pop a little bit. I don't want to see it yet. So in the position where I don't want to see it, like where the static is still interacting with the TV behind it, I don't want to see the logo there. So I want to go ahead and make it invisible. So let's just one at a time. Let's turn the opacity down to 0%, right? So I set my timeline where I wanted it to not be visible, and then change my opacity setting where it says 100, the number right next to the word opacity, to 0. Good so far. I'm going to reduce the scale as well. So I'm not moving my timeline. I'm just turning the scale down. I'm going to go ahead and turn the scale down. So I don't know, 25% or 30% of the normal size. So again, you should not be able to see your opacity is turned to 0, but you should be able to see that the box has gotten smaller now, the bounding box that's around that logo, the logo layer. Now I also can interact with it through this system here. This is the position, right? So the position numbers, one of them is the X, I believe the first one is X, and the Y is the second position. You can actually just click and drag the second number down, and that will push the logo down. So just push it so like that square now is beneath the TV, like just down to the bottom there. So I try to do that all at once, and I apologize. I'm not trying to go too fast. But now what you should see now when you kind of advance your scrub there, it's just kind of that the logo appears after the static, and it pops up underneath the TV, right? Because we set up the track mat or the mask for it so that it only appears on the TV and then just kind of pops up in the screen. Good so far? Now what we want to do is kind of do another zoom scale effect, right? To be able to have these all go at the same time. So just advance your timeline just a little bit. We want that logo to hang on there for just a second, right? To get that time kind of like it's just sitting there just for a sec. We want it to just kind of like sit there so you can see it and appreciate it before it starts doing its next motion. So I'm just going to advance my timeline just a little bit, maybe half a second, something like that. And I'm actually going to go back to the position of the TV and then change the scale of the TV and the rotation of the TV. So now I still have position open underneath the TV. So if you still see position, you're good to go. If you don't see position, just select the TV layer and hit P once. I'm gonna hold the Shift key and hit the R key, which is rotation. This is our final one for this little challenge here. So I do wanna start the stopwatch for rotation. And this is very important, I want to click the keyframe button next to the position. So if you want to look at my screen really close here, I'll try to make sure that we can see it here. I'm just going to make sure that like position is highlighted so you can see it. If you go all the way to the left, there's a little empty diamond. It's kind of a just like kind of a gray outline diamond. I want to click that once and that'll turn it to blue. And you should see that there's a new keyframe where your timeline is on your timeline in your layer for the position of that TV. The reason we do that is we want it to stay where it is until we want it to move, right? So that keyframe is saying stay here in between all of the space between what would be point B and point C. Do you guys see the position on the TV? We had point A and point B, and we made it do kind of like a zoom from the left, or sorry, from the right-hand side of the screen over to the left to the center. We want to make sure that it doesn't move in between B and C. And we'll make sure it doesn't move by just clicking that keyframe once. Now it shouldn't do any motion in between all of that. Now we'll advance our timeline just a little bit. And let's go ahead and move our TV and rotation. So let's return it just a little bit. There's a degree here. You can actually click and drag it to the left or to the right. And I really just need just a tiny bit of rotation there. Here we go. So it's starting to turn slightly. I did advance my timeline, so it's now getting a little bit closer to 5 seconds or so. Let's make the position drop a little bit. So we'll kind of drop the position down. And then let's also add a scale. I forgot about scale, so let's hold Shift and hit S to turn the scale on.
Every time when I try changing it to the blue diamond, it doesn't leave a blue diamond as it is. It moves my my time to
yes. Okay. I know what's going on. That's a really great question. And thank you so much for asking that. If you can see, there's actually right next to that gray diamond, there's actually a left and a right arrow. And it might be that you're just misclicking that center diamond. So the left and the right arrow will actually allow you to advance in your timeline to the next or previous keyframe. Does that make sense? Do you guys see that on my screen happening each time I'm clicking these little arrows? So it might be what it's doing is kind of moving your timeline to the next kind of keyframe. So you do have to be very careful to click it right on that center diamond. So it's tough because this interface is so small. There's 3 little buttons right there. Kind of go back to the left, go to previous keyframe, go to next keyframe, or add or remove a keyframe. So when you click that, it'll add a keyframe or remove them.
Okay.
Yay. Okay, excellent. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit Shift and S to add scale, and we want to pop the scale of our TV, which will make everything grow at the same time because they're all parented together now. So I'm going to hit the timeline, the stopwatch on the scale. Am I going too fast again? I'm sorry. So we want it to be about 100%, and then we want it to be like 1,000% once we're done with this little jump in position and rotation. So you can change that number, advancing your keyframe to the next little spot here. It's almost to about 5 seconds, and we'll increase this number to like 1,000 or 600. You guys like 1,000? We can do 1,000. It's cool. 1,001, I guess, is what I got. Any number that's really big. So it just kind of like fills the screen. It just kind of like zooms towards you. And now while it's doing that zoom, we want everything to fade. So we're ready for like the next slide in a presentation or the next part in the video, right? Like this might be just like a little logo animation at the beginning of a video. Little, you know, WSU video. So I'm going to hold Shift and hit T to open up my opacity. I'm going to turn it from 100 to 0 over that same amount of time. And you should see that all of these 4 keyframes, which we've animated now over top of all these, are kind of all in the same spot. Oops, you know what? I guess opacity does not get included in the parenting system, in which case I need to also add a transparency or opacity setting on the logo here. So I need to switch over to my logo layer, add a keyframe where it's at 100%. And then at the same time, so that that timeline slider lines up with all my other keyframes underneath, turn that to 0 as well. There we go. There we go. Now the TV and the WSU logo will fade to black as it kind of zooms towards the screen. Now, if, you know, I don't know that my computer will play everything because I'm on Zoom and may not do it very well, but I can set up my workspace to be able to preview this video by clicking my little time slider here so that it's at 0 and 5 seconds. And then I can play through it and watch the whole thing. You know, if there were things that were like not working, I would kind of back up and redo it. We're doing okay? Or did I do that all too fast? I'm sorry.
Can you repeat the part where you scale the logo?
Yeah, sure. So I actually did not add the scale to the logo. I actually added it to the TV layer because if you remember, we added a parenting effect to the logo. Apparently, when you're doing a parenting, it will follow all of its position, all of its scale, all of its rotation, but will not follow the opacity. So I did that onto the scale setting on the TV. So I decided where I wanted it to start scaling. So it's at 100%. I just kind of positioned my timeline in that spot where I want it to be 100% scale. I clicked the stopwatch to start animating there. That will automatically, when you click the stopwatch the first time, add a keyframe. So you don't need to also add another keyframe, or in which case would remove a keyframe by clicking the keyframe button. But I'm going to go ahead and advance my timeline to where I want it to be like 1000% scale, which is like, I don't know, just a little bit ahead. It's less than a second. It's less than half a second. It's just a little advancement. And then I change the number of the scale. And when you do that, it will also automatically add a keyframe when you make a change on a timeline where there isn't already a keyframe. So I've just increased the scale of that to about 1000. You can also click on it once and type in 1000 if you want to. If you don't want to click and drag to get it to advance that way, you can just click on the number once and it'll change to 1000. Does that help, Amber?
Yeah, I got it. Thanks.
Yeah, awesome. All right, and then the last thing I needed to do was make it fade out. So I actually had to do the opacity setting individually on both the TV and the logo layer to get them to both sort of fade out. I wanted them to fade evenly. So at the same time, like this one starts at 4.5 seconds or so, and this one goes to about 4 3/4 seconds. I just made sure that those timelines, those keyframes lined up on the timeline. All right. Now I do want to show you how to render this. So that is the final thing for today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me, guys. I know this is a long class. I know this was maybe a little tedious for those of you who are familiar with After Effects. Appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for hanging out. But let me go ahead and show you how to render. Let me change my screen. Oh, sorry. Is there another question?
Yeah. I do not have a black background, but I have the checkers background.
The checkers background. Okay. Like that?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, so it's a little button right here underneath your viewfinder where it says toggle transparency grid. You can turn that off. And actually it will render with a black background. So even if you have that on, you will not be able to see that when you render the video. That's a great question. Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much for asking that. Yeah, so you can just turn that on and off right there. Yeah, excellent. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and change my screen so you can see the whole thing. Switching to desktop real quick here. And all we need to do then is go to composition and down to choose the option add to Adobe Media Encoder Queue. If you don't have Adobe Media Encoder installed yet as a program, please do that. This is the preferred program for rendering. And if you don't have it like open yet, it'll take a minute to open. But this is where we want to be able to render that. So I'm just going to click that and go ahead and open that program real quick. It'll take a second. There's a couple settings that we can sort of load up in this to be able to add in this to be rendered. There's Adobe Media Q loading up there. Pretty sweet three-dimensional artwork. This is a rectangle. Ooh, I think maybe it's a stylized, representation of a timeline with keyframes. They just turned it to be vertical. It's pretty fun. Sorry, I should have preloaded this. Apologies. Once it's open, it may take a second for it to add in. It'll add it in right here. You'll be able to choose the format for your file. You'll be able to choose the output name, and then you'll be able to click this little button that's in the top here, this little play button, to be able to choose to play it. And if we just give it just a second, it should be able to jump in. Let me check the chat real quick. There it goes. There we go. All right. So the best format for this to post things on the internet is this one, H.264. This is the one that's preferred by pretty much everywhere. So YouTube will want you to do this. These are called codecs. We don't have to go into what those mean, but just choose this one, H.264. This is where you can choose where your output is to. So if I click on those blue words, it'll open up with a window that shows me like, where do I want to actually save this file? In which case, I can save it somewhere on my desktop or in my project files, animationing 1.0, that's fine. It is going to be an MP4 file in this codec format. So H.264 will save it as an MP4 file. I'm going to hit save, and then when I just select it, right, I'm going to click on this one as a layer. I can hit this little play button now, and it'll actually do the rendering down here where it shows the encoding. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the play button. Sometimes if it messes up, it will actually get stuck on this step of the process where it says dynamic link server, and it just will never finish. But just give it a minute, like get up and wander around for a minute and then come back. Most of the time it should be fine. And we're good to go. There it goes. Yay. What, 25 seconds or something to render? Not too bad.